Guests and Gustos, SCAD's virtual series of conversations and digital content with the creators and innovators remaking culture. I'm Jessica Smith, for those of you that don't know, and I'm happy to introduce Malene Barnett. Malene is an artist, entrepreneur, activist, board member of Cerf, and founder of the Black Artists and Designers Guild, a global platform and curated collective of independent Black artists, makers, and designers. Malene has shared her African heritage with a global audience through sculptural ceramic tiles and vessels to mixed media painting, to hand-woven rugs, using natural materials like wool, silks, pastels, and clay. She uncovers a deeper language of her legacy and an authentic understanding of her cultural identity. Her mission is to use art as a tool to create community impact, open doors to the next generation of Black artists, expand the conversation around marginalization of the arts, and create greater opportunities for inclusion. In our conversation today, we will examine the cultural traditions and practices of art in African diaspora and how they translate into Malene's vision of the modern Black experience. Also, make sure to follow her on Instagram at malene.barnett. Okay, so today's poll question for everybody who's following along with the polls. So it's now time for our poll question, and today you have a chance to win Shop SCAD Drawing Kit. So which areas of Malene's career and interests most interest you? Activist, artist, legacy maker, speaker. Okay. So after our conversation, we'll have a brief moment to ask Malene a few questions. So please have them ready to go. And now we're ready to go. Malene, would you like to start?
Sure. Thanks everyone for joining. Listen, I haven't even said anything and you've already made my day, just seeing all the people that have gotten up just to hear me. So thank you for joining. Jessica, it's okay to share my screen now?
Absolutely.
Okay. So bear with me. Can everybody see?
Looks great.
Okay, perfect. Okay. All right. So, and I want to make sure, and everybody can see the pointer. Hopefully, I keep forgetting to put. Okay. All right. So let me just. I just want to make the screen a little smaller. So today, before I start, thanks Jessica for the introduction. And as she said, I am Malene Barnett. I actually, I was based in Brooklyn, New York for the last 12 plus years. I'm currently in Philadelphia in a grad program pursuing, focusing on ceramics. I've had a background in textiles for many years, so I really want to show you how I view my work as legacy work and adding to the work that my ancestors had started. And, but before we start, I'd like to start with this message. Oops, hold on a second. Okay. Imagine a world without the restrictions of colonialism. View my work, share ideas without these restrictions. I begin. So my work is really about bridging the connection to my African heritage, primarily focusing on West and Central Africa, looking at the art forms, the textiles, the objects that were made during those times. I look to these pieces as a way for me to connect to my story, to find and rewrite my narrative culturally, because of a longing of trying to connect to not just the people, but a place that had been taken away. I channel the artists who are some of my favorites. I have many, but Edmonia Lewis, Elizabeth Catlett, as well as Augusta Savage. If you're not familiar with these women, you should definitely look them up. All of them have a different journey, but what is common is that they were all Black women working under the restrictions of what the results of colonialism, but they've all found their way to create and tell the stories of the Black community. Primarily focusing on sculptural objects, but they've all experienced different mediums. And even though I had been in textiles for about 20 something years, I decided that I wanted to explore a new medium. And so when I went back into looking at history, you know, it was Edmonia Lewis, as well as Elizabeth and Augusta, that really inspired me to explore a new medium and channel the practices and stories of the ancestors. These are some of my carpet designs that are current. I've worked with many interior designers in both residential and commercial and hospitality projects. And I work with artisans in Nepal, hand knotting and weaving all of the rugs and wool and silk. But I create all the artwork here. And again, these are a few of the pieces now. But what I want to share more is about how I've been using my textile background to tell the stories about Black culture from different perspectives. My current work is really focusing on the handmade process of the Adare textiles, which is on the left, but then also looking at different signifiers that represent Black identity. And for this collection, I focused on the head wrap. How I translated that was by creating a series of vessels that are all hand built using not a coil technique, but more slab and strip. So if you look closely, you will see that each strip of clay was actually built in an organic procession. I didn't want to think about having any type of perfection because, again, going back to the folds of the head wrap, there is no perfection. And I thought that part of that creates the beauty. The surface is actually mimicking the wax resists of the Adare textiles, which are, you know, indigo dyed. They are using a wax paste. So in working with ceramics, I use the underglaze as well as wax to act as a resist to the glaze to create the markings that are appearing underneath the glaze. This piece on the, this piece on the left, I See You, again, and this one is called Adare 2. They all are using the same type of technique. I've incorporated, this is a metallic glaze, which is sometimes mistaken as a glass bead. I've heard different things, but the idea is that I want people to feel like you're being watched, or the idea of wanting to get closer, or for a Black person to engage in the work to feel like they're being seen because of the lack of visibility of our not just on a level of art, but on all levels in the contributions of building this country hasn't been seen, respected, or celebrated. So that was the idea behind incorporating elements. And the point is that these metallic balls are all around the piece. So whenever you walk around the piece, you will constantly be seen or feel like you're being watched. These are more details of the Adare 2. Again, using the same technique of the strips building, wanting to feel like there is a sense of fabric and the pattern is a signifier to, again, engage people, to bring you closer, wanting to engage in conversations around Black culture. And then this is another adaptation to the series, where instead of using a surface design pattern, I'm actually carving the pattern on the bases. And as you could see, you know, it creates a different effect when you're actually doing the hand carving, but again, using the same technique of the layering to replicate the idea of being wrapped, being held, and each vessel, again, is all one of a kind and unique. This is a close-up of another one from that series. This is actually using a Black clay, all hand-carved details. And this one, I was actually able to extend the folds to even on the curves to create more of the feeling of that head wrap and feeling like it's being folded on the clay. This is another piece called Hope. And again, the idea that using the combination of different glazes on top with the same textile pattern on the bottom to represent the adore processes, in addition to having, having some of the metallic balls. My mouse is very sensitive, so forgive me. The metallic balls to signify the feeling of being seen and as well as being watched. And again, these pieces are all meant to be experienced by walking around them. I do create pieces that are not viewed from one angle on purpose, because the idea is that I want you to become closer and really have to take the time to think about whatever memories that come to mind, emotions, and thoughts. This is actually taking it a little deeper, where I combined the two techniques of the surface of using the underglaze as the pattern as well as the carving. This is a black clay, so the bottom is, pretty much naturally its color when it's fired, but then I did add like a slight wash to give it a little bit of sheen. But again, the clay is actually black, and the metallic balls are still being seen on multiple levels all around the piece. The techniques continue, and on the left, this is just strictly using the underglaze as the resist. And the layering I increased to create a different sense of the signifier of the head wrap, because again, the idea is to continue to develop on the piece and figure out ways to create different conversations. And even when the relation between the two, there's still this play on pattern, and it creates different, it just creates a different contrast. And as I continue to explore this idea of combining fabric with the material of clay, this is where I am right now, where I'm actually creating adding another layer to the surface. So it creates more of an age look. It feels like there's history. It feels like an ancestral textile in a way. And so I'm at the point now where I want to push this even further and work even bigger. And really, the interesting thing is, because I really love color, and color is really the core of my work. And it's interesting how when I started, I was really focused on a very simple color palette. And so right now, I'm actually exploring how to incorporate more color. These pieces all are incorporating different matte underglazes, where it doesn't have a shiny effect, which is totally different than the earlier works. But again, it's still keeping in line with the process. And so I'm in the position right now where I am working to develop more figurative work to bring more life to the piece in different ways, not just life through the clay, but life literally by placing the pieces on bodies where they actually are supposed to be culturally. And so next, I wanted to touch base on a really hot topic these days, cultural appropriation. And, it's interesting just even thinking about the word and why we're having this conversation. And I think right now, because we're in such a pivotal moment that we hope is very pivotal, and it's not that we haven't been here before with the awakening of the existence and concern of Black people and Black culture, but we have to think about how we even got to this point and why this topic is so hot. And we can't have these conversations unless we look at historically how this country has always been appropriated. And so the idea of cultural appropriation, it was part of the plan, which is connected to capitalism. And so we have to go back. And so there are many historical moments where we could pinpoint the sources of how cultural appropriation even started. And when we think about it, It's the idea of one culture taking from another and applying it for their own use without permission and without any explanation, which is all connected to capitalism. And if you look up this British expedition from 1897, where the British had raided Benin City, which is in Nigeria, the Edo people's, the royal palace, and stole all of their art, their bronze sculptures, which are all laying on the ground. And, and this was all based on the idea that the British felt that their trade was being interrupted. And so long story short, I won't get into the whole story, but if we think about this picture and then how the work is being displayed at the British Museum, this is how the appropriation starts, because these works were in a community. They were part of the community's story. It was not meant to be shown on a wall in this way. And so we think this is already setting the marks for Europeans to take from Black, Indigenous, Asian, all Indigenous peoples across the world, which has been the pattern of how we've all been experienced and conditioned to see and accept. And so now, of course, more conversations about these thieveries are at the forefront. And there are articles out now, if you want to read about the exhibition, even about the museums sending the work back. But that's also controversial. I wanted to focus on 3 particular textiles. And again, I focused on textiles from West Africa, West and Central specifically. It's where my heart lies. But this same appropriation adapts to many other communities. So don't feel like this is isolated only to these particular textiles. This is across the board. We could look at from the natives and indigenous people in this country, around the world. The list goes on. So if you're not familiar with the Bogolan, the Bogolafini cloth from Mali, which is a traditional hand-woven, hand-painted textile used for different ceremonial purposes, used to mark different periods of a woman's life from birth to menopause, used as a wrapper for warriors. It's used for different purposes culturally. And it's made in small pieces for a reason, because the work is very intricate. And if you could see, women are hand painting, the men are usually the weavers, but it's a time consuming work. So it's not, it was never meant to be available on a wide scale. And so what happens is the appropriation starts, and because there's this opportunity to capitalize, the art gets lost. And so then stencils are made to reproduce. And so then it becomes a commodity item that is sold worldwide. And then it starts to infiltrate into interiors, and companies start to make copies of the work. And the idea is that these copies are not even thought of as if we are stealing from a community or a person. It's, again, because of the history of appropriation, that it's already been set the tone that it's okay to take, because the thievery has been going on for so long. And this is what has happened where we are today. It continues. We see images of mud cloth, from the bedding to upholstery, and even big companies like Restoration Hardware, who feel that they could take it and then make outdoor fabric with it. And, they'll sell it, and, it's quote unquote, it's made it okay, and creates this outlet for the thievery. So to soothe the egos, as well as continue to appropriate a textile or a material that is native to a community without the permission. And those communities are not benefiting from it. And this is where we have these problems. Kente cloth, another fabric that is actually hand-woven by men in Ghana. It is made on a loom that is 6 inches wide, as you could see on the right and the left. Again, this cloth is really used for special occasions. It's a fabric of the royalty. You know, if you would aspire to have an authentic piece of kente and you would covet it. And so the idea of when you see a piece that is, woven and it's unique, it's, you know, and you're honoring, you know, your culture, and you understand the purpose of these pieces, and then it gets translated into wallpaper that is a direct copy from the original. And so if this was, you know, and I'll be frank, if this was a white artist who designed something and it was copied, lawsuits would happen. There would be, you know, all kinds of reparations for why did they copy. But this happens all the time to indigenous communities around the world, where art is just taken for granted. There is this level that, you know, there's this level that it's okay to do, and the industry and the world has taught us that it's okay to do, but it's not. And I think now is a pivotal moment for us to really pay attention to these images and the conditions that we have been experienced on how we really live with this art. Because, and also we have to think about that, you know, just because this is available and for us to experience, it doesn't mean that we have to keep it or have it in our homes. Unless there is a sense of permission, and unless there is, I think there has to be a lot more care and consideration on how we, you know, expose and live with the pieces. And again, it can continue to where we see this in upholstery fabric. So if we think about the purpose of royalty and the respect and the efforts to make the fabric, and then it gets reduced down to a chair that is in a printed fabric that is probably a few dollars a yard, and the quality is not there. In addition, this appropriation continues when we think about the mask of various communities, from the Yoruba, the Dogon, and I have a picture of the Dogon on the left. We are conditioned to see these works hung on the wall. This is what we all have experienced, even myself, you know, and now doing more research and thinking about these pieces, it actually ties back to that 1897 looting of the British, and thinking about how those same objects are now on display, not just in the British Museum, but in various museums around the world. And this is how we've been trained to experience the work mass from the different communities, but yet these pieces are all living objects that are a part of ceremonies, and they don't have purpose unless there was a call to the ancestors in some way or performance. But because the thieves, you know, we're talking about the Europeans right now, had no connection to the culture, couldn't understand why, they took it upon themselves to create a new story. And this is the story that we are very accustomed to as decorative objects on the wall. And it's even gotten me to rethink about how we, you know, how myself, with the work that I do in the community of, you know, unlearning a lot of the things that have been fed to us about objects, art from different communities. Kuba cloth, another cloth that is also hand woven and embroidered. Again, these are all collaborative works, and they continue to be appropriated in interiors in different ways, from the pillows, and as you can see on the cover, another imitation of mud cloth. Sorry for the fuzzy picture, but you know, but again, these pieces are you know, hung on the wall as objects without any consideration to the original purpose. And this is a Kuba cloth that has been reproduced in a running fabric as well as a wallpaper with this company. And then they've added to actually created a surfboard. In addition, now if we think about Kuba cloth and the importance of this fabric, to be subjected to a surfboard really doesn't make any sense to me. But again, this is how appropriation works, where people want to take items and appropriate it to what they feel it should be and then capitalize on it. And I will close with the work that I've been doing with the Black Artists and Designers Guild. If you're not familiar with the collective, we are a collective of Black artists, designers, makers throughout the Black diaspora. We are based in New York, but we have members all over the world, in the US, the Caribbean, Europe, and in Africa. We have been working towards building equity and an inclusive creative culture, rewriting our own narrative, as well as creating our own projects so that we have an opportunity to be positioned as creative thinkers. The industry as a whole, society has continued to leave not just our work and visibility of our work out of the story or conversations, but also our culture has been used and without the respect and acknowledgement to the contributions of design. And so we are actively changing that narrative, and we're about 100 members now. And I'm just going to share a sneak peek of our latest project, which is, which is Obsidian. Obsidian, which is a virtual concept house, really focusing on the future dwelling of Black families. We decided as a collective to design a space that really supported the wellness of Black families. Two of our architects on our team have designed the space. It's going to be a virtual immersive experience where people will be able to walk through the house through high renderings, 360-degree experiences. And we have created a space that is truly sustainable. This idea came out of being at home during COVID, the early periods of COVID, and really thinking about how we could create our own projects, which is part of the mission of the Guild. And we're actually launching the announcement today, so you're getting a sneak peek, but the first article about the house is going out at noon. And we are launching in winter of 2021. So there'll be a collective of about 24 designers on the project, where we each had a space to design based on Black cultural processes, futurism, sustainability, and innovation. And we also have technology involved in this project. So we're really excited. And we also did a lot of research where we interviewed Black families, and we're not thinking about family as the nuclear family that we're conditioned to be thought of. So we're looking at the multiplicities of Black families and the generational living, as well as whether you're a single person, no children, you're a gay couple, it doesn't matter. We're looking at all the different multiplicities of Black families. And so we're excited to share that. And I think, yes. And so I thank you for experiencing this conversation and journey. This is actually a photograph that I took of Natumsi. Last year I had an opportunity to go to Ghana for the third time actually, and work alongside the Elway Potters and Cooley. And Natumsi she's 91 now, because I took this picture when she was 90 years young. And she's been making pots for about 50 plus years. And I had the honor of photographing her because she asked me. She specifically came to me and asked me to take her photograph. And I just love sharing her work, her spirit, and the energy of her and the community continue to fuel what I do. And so thank you.
Great, thank you so much. That was amazing. I got a sneak peek at it, but you added some slides, so that was even, it gave me like a little surprise too. So thank you so much. It was so amazing. And I think that, so the plan is that I have a couple questions to ask you, and then we're gonna open up, you're already, there's already many questions in the chat, so I wanna give time for students as well. But actually the first question I have that came up, and you ended it on such a beautiful place to segue into it, is I would actually like to know how you, so for all of the travelers in the world, as we go to different countries and we're looking at these different objects and considering the idea of adding them to our own personal collections. And as you said, I think many of us are rethinking the way that we are collecting and how we're showing the works in our own homes and our own lives. So I guess one of the questions would be, how do you sort of go into the idea of building a collection from your travels?
Well, I like to work directly with the artists who make the work, if possible. So when I travel, I like to ask, like, where the locals, like, where do you find the best, whatever that item is, and actually start to build a relationship with the artist versus just buying the art, like, say, in a market or on the side of the road, where, it depends on what country you're in. But that is like my first thought. How do I build a connection with the artist? So, like, for example, when I was in Ghana last year, I actually built a relation with an Ewe Kente cloth weaver. And it's his family who's been weaving for a long time. His father taught him, his father's father taught him. So it's been passed down. And so buying the cloth from him, there's this connection. And he knows that I'm not going to take it and then try to replicate it so then I can make a business from it. I think of these objects or these items as when someone gives you a gift, you don't necessarily say, okay, now I'm going to copy it, make a whole bunch of them. And I think the idea is that we have to think of these objects and the art as these gifts, not to be replicated. If the purpose of collecting the objects is to tell the stories of the community. It's not so much to capitalize. And the problem is, it's the condition is to capitalize.
Do you think it's actually possible in this, now that designers and artists are rethinking how we look at objects as inspiration? Is it possible to even, obviously we can draw inspiration, but to do any sort of direct or indirect drawing from these motifs? Or should designers just stay away from the areas that are not part of their own particular communities?
I think we need many years of designers staying away from other people's cultures that are not theirs. Because what's happened is there's this lack of creativity. And it's just, we've been conditioned to copy. And so if there's one thing to look at the inspiration and say, okay, how is this made? Because look at process. So if, for example, say the material is silk and it's woven, you only could use 5 colors. Now come up with your own design. If you're using the same parameters as the weaver, say in Ghana, but come up with your own pattern. Don't use the same pattern. And so what's happened is we're losing that idea of being creative because we're so used to looking at work all the time. And honestly, one of the things I do less of is look at other people's work while I'm creating, because that is, again, that distracts from me coming up with my own ideas.
It's interesting because the wallpaper you showed, which is related to the EU, and it's also interesting because I think many people don't know that the EU and the Ashanti had different motifs that they were working with. So that wallpaper, the first thing I saw was the scale. It was such a contemporary scale, like let's make everything bigger and it makes it more modern. But that scale, the increase of the scale, lost actually the beautiful details that the weaving, as what I know from seeing it, the beautiful details of what that weaving meant, right?
Exactly.
So the idea of learning about the process, I think, or the weavers, like learning how a strip weaving is made and then creating your own work is really interesting.
Yeah. I think we need to do more of that. And I think as creatives, we'll have better practices because it will be about the materials in the process and less about the actual motif that's created as the focus. Because again, for me to work with Ghana or say Kente cloth, that is part of my DNA. You know, I am not taking from my own people. This is my work. And so there's also that lack of understanding too, that if Black people are engaging in the work that has been stolen and has been erased from our narrative, we are now reclaiming it, and we can. And so, and I encourage the Black designers, artists, and makers to really go back and reclaim those techniques, the materials that are ours. And, but again, continue with the legacy of making, because again, the weaving, the, making of clay, working in all these different materials, there's still, when you think about how long it's existed, and that I could still look at and find a Kente weaver, whether Ashanti or Ewe, which I feel is like, these are the gifts of the ancestors. So how do I continue to tell that story? And if people would think about that within their own culture and do more of that and less of trying to take, I think we'd have different conversations around creativity, and it wouldn't be so focused on the Eurocentric way of creating.
Yeah. Fascinating. The other idea that comes to mind actually when you talk about this is, and this is another topic that's happening, is people, designers and artists coming to different countries and working with actually artisans within the communities. And I think there's been some great examples, and we know that there's been some really deleterious examples of this. But have you ever worked with an artist with a workshop or a community in making designs for you, or what do you think about that process?
Yeah, I've worked in Nepal. I've worked in India. Those are the two primary countries where I've actually made product. I go to the countries. I've developed relationship with the artists, the owners of the companies. Again, I feel it's I feel that there's this level of respect when I work with the artists, because I want to work also with the people who have mastered a certain craft. I'm interested in the materials and the process, but I'm always incorporating my own designs. So I'm not necessarily, because I'm in India and I love the designs coming out of India, but I don't look to that as my source of inspiration or the work that I'm doing. It's about the process, and then some of these processes overlap, and so I feel connected when I travel to India many times. So I feel very much connected. But again, that has a lot to do with colonialization and because my family's from the Caribbean, and there's a heavily Indian influence in the Caribbean. And so there's always been. And so again, it's just part of the experience. But because I know I'm coming from a certain level of respect, I think there's a different connection in working with those artisans.
So I've been sort of looking at the chats as they pop in and the questions that come up, and there seems to be a lot of questions about the idea of, especially with the African American experience in terms of not knowing roots, right?
Yes.
But not just in that. One of the questions came up about adoption and how do you so especially in working with the Black Artists and Designers Guild, how do you start to look for these roots that you're saying, these connections, when so much of it has been lost?
Well, I know for me, what I've done is I started with my DNA test just to see what parts of the continent. And, it's interesting. We're looking at west to south central. So we're starting in Nigeria and working our way down the coast and going into the Congo a little bit. So I started there. And then guess what? Africa is a huge continent. It's a huge continent, okay? And just in one country alone, you're gonna have hundreds of languages, and so you're gonna just start with a few groups of people. If you want it to be, I'm just making up, if you wanna learn more about the Fulani, you feel connected to Fulani, go in. Learn as much as you can about the Fulani. If it's the Yoruba, if it's the Dogon, if it's the Igbo, just whichever group. And then start to connect it to say, again, maybe your family grew up in the Caribbean. Go back to the roots. Look to see if you could really find out the countries where, you know, we were kidnapped the most, and then you'll start to see the correlation. When I was in Ghana, I felt like I was in Jamaica. And there's a reason for that, because when you look in the history books, Ghana was where they kidnapped the most Africans and brought to Jamaica. Jamaica was one of the biggest ports, you know, and it was a popular port for deportation. And so it made sense that when I was in Ghana, I felt like I was in Jamaica. And when I'm in Jamaica, I feel like I'm Ghana, because it's the same people. It's just that we're talking about just two different land locations. But then culturally, you'll start to see some of the similarities. You'll see what was, you know, preserved, I should say, you know, and that's how you start. And I think especially as Black people, not just in this country, but globally, who have or are part of the diaspora, we have to understand that this work to connect to our ancestry is a lifelong commitment. It doesn't start with one project and then you feel like it's done. I've made a commitment. This is lifelong, Jessica. So when I'm gone, you know, it has to continue. This is lifelong. This is how I speak about my work, and every day, everything. And I think that is what has to happen, you know, when you're starting to do this research and searching for your roots. It has to become a part of your life and a part of the conversation. And I think now more than ever is the time to really start to take a deeper dive, and also be okay with not knowing, but don't be okay with not knowing. And that is the key. And when other groups of people, specifically white people, ask you and question, you know, and I'm speaking to the Black designers, artists out there, question about your heritage. They have no right to question. And if they do, you know, the thing is, why don't you question them and say, well, the reason I don't know is because guess what? You stole and stripped everything from my community. And now I'm trying to take it back. Give me my moment. Just as much time as you stripped over the 500 years, 5 generations, I need as much time to put the pieces back. So I need the space to do that. And that's what I'm doing right now with the work, is I'm carving out that space. And I think it's very key, you know, for Black creatives to carve out that space so they can figure it out.
That leads to the question I was just going to ask, is part of your going back and pursuing a master's in ceramics, part of that sort of search and parting the idea of carving out?
Exactly. The work I'm doing in school is about carving out that time. The work I do with the Guild is also to carve out, because the reality is racism, white supremacy, colonialism, all of that is not going away. It's not going away overnight. It's not going away in my lifetime. And as Black people, I feel we understand that. And so understanding that we still need our space for liberation, for a sense of freedom, for a sense of a space so we could think and be ourselves. And I think that's very important for our mental health and our well-being moving forward. And so my goal and my focus is, how do you create and continue to imagine what life would be without the restrictions of colonialism? And carving this space from the Guild, taking this time out in school, is allowing me to cultivate all of that and really encourage the community to create their own spaces too.
So I could keep talking to you about this or asking you questions, because it's, you know, so wonderful to hear your voice. But I'm going to let the students actually ask some questions as well. I mean, I've been trying to ask their questions in my questions, but I'm going to go I'm going to actually so for all the students that are here and faculty and designers and everybody that's here, we will get these questions to Malene, and so even if she doesn't answer all of the questions, that she'll be able to see what was being asked. I think that's a really important part of giving voice. So one of the questions is, you're mentioning of the Obsidian Project. This is from Victoria Bronson. You're mentioning of the Obsidian Project and the ideas of future of Black people looks something that contributes to Afrofuturism. What is your take on the Afrofuturism movement? And what else are you exploring related to this topic? That's a big one, right? I'm sorry. I just looked at that, but I was actually, you mentioned futurism, and I was thinking about that as well. So.
Oh, okay, so let's go back. Let's break it down again. Sorry.
So
First
the question
part.
is, I think really what she's asking is that you mentioned futurism in the Obsidian
Yes.
project,
Yes.
and we know that the Afrofuturism movement is taking in the design and the art world, and in many worlds, right, is taking on a lot of momentum. And so I think what she would like to know is is there explorations? What's your take on the movement itself, the Afro?
But I think the idea is, I mean, our house is set in 2025, right? And so when we think about it, it's really not far. So the idea is that the future is now. And how do we create those spaces for the community now? When we think about this whole idea of futurism, like it's like way out, and I think how we're defining it again as a collective, outside of, the different groups that have been talking about it, is that we're saying that is right now. And how do we plan for that and create, knowing in the next 2-3 years, again, which is relatively now, how do we want to live? How do we claim back the work, even when we think about architecture, right? Architecture is like an elitist practice. It's an elitist type of, if you could hire someone to design your house and build your house, it's an elitist type of opportunity. But we're saying, no, we are the architects of this world. We've been building for centuries. This work that we've been doing, we may not have called it architecture, because again, that comes out of, the colonialism, but we've been building, and then we literally have built this country as well as many other countries. So how do we take back the ownership of creating space for ourselves? And that's how we're looking at, futurism, but also saying that we have that opportunity to claim it.
Okay. So this actually has another sort of section in that, but it's talking specifically more about the Black Artists and Designers Guild and the questions around intersectionality. So the question is, does intersectionality have any part in any of your or the Black Artists and Designers Guild work? And maybe even colorism, LGBTQ, identities in Black community, religions, such as Islam. So where is that conversation coming up in your work and in their work?
Yeah, well, one of the things about the Guild is that all you have to do is identify as Black. We're not, as far as gender, we have that. Queer, heterosexual, it's all included in Christian faith from Islam. It's all included, because again, all of those things that we connect to, whether it's through religion, whether it's through sexuality, whether it's through the relational status, all of those conversations we have as a collective, but it's not part of. I'll say we do not restrict as far as not including. Oh, did I lose? Oh, sorry. I think I felt like I was talking to you, Jessica, and then someone else's face just showed.
Yeah, right.
Oh, okay. So sorry.
That was Sam. She.
Oh, okay. Okay. Because I was like, what happened? So I want to make sure that I'm answering the question. Okay.
The question's about intersectionality.
Yes. I feel that the Guild does. We include that in our conversation. Even it's interesting because we've been talking about the Black family, and one of the many focuses that we wanted to make sure that this house was not for husband, wife, and 2 kids. Because the members who are designing this space, we all have a different family makeup in our household. I'm a single woman. The architect is a queer man who has a partner. The other architect is a Black female who's married with 3 kids. So we're saying, wait a second now, we have to design this house for everybody in this, because we're all part of the diaspora. We all have this commonality. The experience, they overlap, they vary, but we want to share all of it. So I guess the short answer of the question is yes, we address it.
So that actually leads to some other questions, and I'm just going to sort of summarize it. I think that some of the, many of the students would like you to talk a little bit about directly about your design and the interior design projects you work on and the different practices and sort of how you're working on them, maybe talking about ones that you think have been challenging and ones that you are really excited about.
Well, when it comes to the interior design projects, I've worked primarily with interior designers who are working on commercial, residential, or hospitality projects. So I've designed rugs for, say, the Marriott, which is the Moxie, downtown New York City, from the presidential suites at the Omni Hotel to private residences and across, all over the country as well as internationally. Actually, one of my clients has a project in the September issue of House Beautiful magazine, which is a project that was in Jamaica, where I designed the rugs for, certain parts of that villa that was designed. I think the challenge with working with designers coming from the maker side or product side has been the translation of my creativity was stifled, and which actually encouraged me to start to seek other ways to express my creativity and take control of it more, because it was being lost when I was working with the designers. And that was one of the reasons why I took a break from that work to seek other materials to work with. And that's how I found clay.
And are you continuing your textile practice, or have you sort of moved into clay and at the time are focusing your energies in that area?
I will say this, right now, the business of working on custom projects with designers is on pause. I do still accept work from those who I've worked with, but I'm really focused on the materials right now, and textiles will always be a love and a focus. So my goal is to incorporate fibers into my clay practice. And that is what I'm taking the time right now to figure out how I bring these different materials together.
So, okay, so I'm actually looking for these questions because I think I'm touching on so many of them.
Yeah.
Here's actually a specific question, and this is from one of our graduate students who's from Kenya. And Maura asked, before colonization, we didn't consider ourselves as individuals, but as one, because we moved freely and exchanged food, culture, and traditions. But after the division of countries during the scramble for Africa in 1885, we were given these borders. Can we then be accused of cultural appropriation of fellow Africans borrowing from other African cultures? She was interested in hearing your thoughts about that. And you've talked about that in terms of as African Americans looking at, but
yeah, I don't consider it that way at all. I think, again, because we work as a collective, and I think if we're exchanging ideas amongst each other, I think that's a different, because again, appropriation is when it becomes something else that it's not, and there's this level of capitalization on it, and there's this lack of respect and for the communities to benefit from that, and that's what happens. And I think how these things have been disguised are through quote unquote these social enterprises, which I have a huge thing about, and but that's a whole nother lecture. But no, I honestly, to the answer the student's question is, I don't think it's the same thing at all.
And when you say social enterprises,
yes,
you're talking about?
I'm talking about the businesses like some that I shared where they're working with artists in, say, Mali, right. And they're saying they're practicing ethical, fair trade. And even with using those terms, it's like, well, if you're in business, why do you need to put that out? Like, shouldn't you be doing that anyway? So it's become these, marketing terms for social enterprises. But then again, they're really not supporting the community. I don't think the people aren't really benefiting. Again, it's just another way of getting cheap labor, which is part of what capitalism is. It's just you're doing it in another country. So again, and most of them are run by white women, and that has been the face of these businesses. And so we know that there are these young white women running these businesses, going to, and again, I'm using Africa as one, but they're going all over the world doing the same thing. It's this model. And I really have a it's a huge pet peeve with that whole model. And but again, that's a whole nother lecture.
It is, but it is actually, it's related in a sense, because I think one of the things that comes up that to me is really interesting in looking at the impact of the Black Lives Matter movement on trends today. So we know this has happened in past situations where we have suddenly trends are sort of, literally using the word you use, capitalizing on movements, and therefore I suspect we're seeing more and more of these NGOs in Africa moving out of, let's say, places in Southeast Asia that they once were, or in Central America. And so as these trends sort of move around, I think that there's this really, I mean, and this is what you're talking about, that unfortunately what happens is the trends move, you know, when people are no longer interested in Africa, as you said, it's this huge country, so you can't even, I mean, this huge continent, you can't even say Africa, but when people are no longer interested in this Central West African textiles because now they're moving somewhere else, they just abandon these communities. And so they've set up shop that are, you know, really making goods for the outside, and then suddenly that there's no work involved. And I think that that's a really important, I'm actually, I know it's another topic, but I think it's really related because it is the way we lose, and actually cultures lose their own, not only identities, but actually understanding of their own practices, because they start to change their practices. They actually literally start to change their process to meet the demands.
That's right. And I think with the word, even using the word trend, when we're talking about the communities, that none of them are trends. Like, you know, even when we think about this moment, you know, I've seen that word used. I'm like, listen, Black people are not a trend. Black culture is not a trend. And so, you know, and again, but this is the conditioning. Right. And the unlearning, and there's a lot of unlearning that has to be done.
Yeah. Well, as you said, I think actually that we're sort of getting out of our time, but I think that one of the things that really resonated from your talk at the very beginning was this idea that we, the way that we even look at masks, right? So I have a collection of objects that I got when I was traveling in Southern Africa. And of course you do display them in that way that you said, those masks on the wall. Yes. And it really is really inappropriate. Like that is not the intention of those objects. So I think in the same way, these aren't trends, these are actually cultural practices that are really important to the communities.
Yeah.
So thank you so much. And actually everybody has said, so we're getting so many thank yous. So I'm really glad that you're going to be able to see these. Joanna Jordan says, thank you. This talk truly inspired and validated me in the process. I appreciate you.
Oh, thank you,
Joanna. Queen. And Sam, who you momentarily saw, said thank you. It's very important and thought-provoking time and space was created through this talk. So everybody has been saying thank you. It has been so wonderful and so meaningful. So more than I wanted it to be. So I'm really grateful.
Oh, thank you, thanks. Yes, please do share the chat, because I definitely want to be able to read, because and hopefully I could. Anyway, if I didn't answer your question, thank you again. I'm on Instagram, so feel free to follow. I would say to send a DM, and you can, but just be patient with my response. I'll just be honest. A lot is going on, but I do try to respond. So
great, thank you. That was one of the questions early on, which was, do you accept emails and following those? So yeah, Instagram is a great place to find you.
Instagram, or you can send an email. You go to my website, malenebarnett.com, and send an email. Again, as long as you're patient with the response, I do my best to respond. So
okay, great. Thank you again so much. And I think that I have one before we go. I have one more on this piece of paper that it was, so thank you again. And thanks to everybody for coming and spending an hour listening to this inspiring and informative and thought-provoking. There's so many things that are going to come out of this conversation, I know, in every class. So the other thing.
Will I see the results of the poll? I was just curious.
Yeah, right. Do we know?
Do you know? I'm just curious.
Okay,
artist.
artist. Okay.
Yeah,
Cool.
yeah, that's great. And that was before you spoke, so it might be different.
Okay.
Okay, and then for everybody, so this is one of many guests and guesses and exciting, and the next one is please join us today at 2 p.m. when we'll be discussing innovating in the wellness space with fitness designer Eric Valenci. Have a great day, everybody. Thank you very much. And Malene, thank you. I hope that we get to see you again.
Thank you. Thank you. Bye, everyone. Thank you.